any possibility of good use.
My guest today is Dr. Todd Miles. He's a professor of theology at Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon. And this guy is not just monodimensional. He's also got chops, worked as a nuclear engineer, and he is holding it down as a husband, a father of 6, and his upcoming book, Cannabis and the Christian, What the Bible Says About Marijuana, is already doing well in its pre-sales in Amazon. It's about to be released August 17th. So please, would you welcome Todd Miles? Hello, Todd.
Hello, Amy. It is good to be with you.
I'm so thankful that you carved out time from grading all your papers to hang out with me today.
I'm grateful that you rescued me from grading papers for a while.
Awesome. All right. I want to protect your time and get into this. So I'm just going to help our listeners understand this topic of marijuana, not new, but it does seem to be increasingly interesting to people. We've been talking about marijuana's potential benefits and dangers for some time. So what prompted you to wade through staggering amounts of research, I noticed in all of your notes, to address Christianity and cannabis use at this time?
Well, the motivation really started in the context of the local church. I serve as an elder at my church, and Portland, Oregon, where I live, is right across the river from the state of Washington. The state of Washington legalized recreational cannabis use in like December of 2012 or so somewhere in that time period, and almost immediately after, I think it was the next day, we had someone in the church come to the leadership and ask, would it be okay if I went across the river and smoked some pot now that it's legal? And we realized that the typical Christian answer, which was no, because it's against the law, it would no longer suffice. That we had to, dare I say it, think like Christians for a change on this topic. And ask the question, okay, Lord, we believe that your word is sufficient. That is, we have all the divine words that we might need, or not might need, we have all the divine words that we need in order to live faithfully before you. Might not have all the words that we want, but we have all the words that we need. How do we bring to bear what you have revealed in Scripture to this question? And so then I started thinking about it. I was doing I did a pastor's conference where I did a breakout session every year on, it's called like staying ahead of the curve, kind of theological or ethical hot topics that I thought pastors need to be thinking about. And I got up at the intro to that conference where we, gave a little spiel for our breakout session. And I said, hey, I'm gonna do a breakout session on the pastor and pot. And like everybody laughed. Everybody laughed, this whole crowd. And for the next day before my breakout session, people would come up to me and say, hey, how about Deacon in the doobie? How about Trinity in the tree, Bible in the blunt, weed in the way, or whatever. And I just thought, man, this is like it's like a joke, right? Nobody's going to show up. But when the time came for the breakout session, it really wasn't a breakout session. It was basically a plenary session. Everybody was there, people standing out into the hallways. And since then, I've been asked to come to churches and talk about this. And I had just at the time just put together a little bit of research, but that little bit was way more than anybody had done in thinking about this. So then the book came out of it, and I realized right off the bat that I needed 2 different topics. I needed a recreational marijuana talk, and I needed a medical marijuana talk, because I do think those issues are different. The substance is the same, right? Marijuana is marijuana, cannabis is cannabis, and unless you get one of those FDA approved drugs where they've isolated a component. Okay, so then that's different. But and because of that, the discipleship questions are different between, I think, recreational use and medical use.
You mentioned that, we have to think like Christians. We haven't done a great job at the conversation on the Christianity side because we've just left it to it's illegal, don't do it. But in what other ways has Christianity not shown up well in the discussion surrounding marijuana?
Yeah. Well, I think that along with that, not thinking about it, has come a dismissiveness that can
Mm-hmm.
border on arrogance or judgmentalism at times.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I was in high school in the '80s, the early '80s, and there was the group of kids who went out and smoked pot across the street, and they were the stoners. That's what we called them, right? The stoners. And it wasn't like they were high academic achievers. It was easy just to kind of look down our noses at them and think that we were better. Um, not 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 thinking compassionately at all about what they
Mm-hmm.
might have been going through that would push them towards this. Probably at this point, it's there's certainly some rebellion going on for them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one way, um, and then I think that that with that dismissiveness, we haven't thought through issues related to the medical benefits
Mm-hmm.
of marijuana. And so we're dismissive of those. Here's where I think that medical marijuana is helpful for just getting Christians to think like Christians,
Mm.
because there's a stigma attached to marijuana use in the church, right? People just go, "Oh, marijuana, that's wrong." Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then when maybe a doctor might recommend it, family members might recommend it as well. There's that thought, wait, is this right? Is this right? And I think that's a helpful question. That just because it comes with some medical benefit, I probably should still think through a grid as a Christian. Is this okay? I
Mm-hmm.
would. We should have been thinking that way about a lot of things for a long time. We are in the middle of an opioid addiction epidemic in America.
Uh-huh.
And many of those are Christians, most of whom, I suppose, first started using opioids because they were prescribed by a doctor they trusted.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, those are a couple things that I can think of.
I want to read to you a couple of comments from my Facebook page. I put out um, a little call to respond, and basically, I was just asking, how well does your faith-based community do in helping you understand the potential benefits and maybe even potential dangers of cannabis? And I got kind of a range of answers, but at the thicker part of the range was people saying things like David here, who says, "Is this a joke? No Christians talk about marijuana. They take their Jesus underoos off and then talk about it. Mixing faith with marijuana, leave that to the Rastafarians." And then Brandon, who I know personally, says, "Conversation? What's that? In the circles I've experienced, it's treated like most other taboo subjects. They don't exist. And if you find out they do exist, you shouldn't entertain the thought of partaking." You have any commentary to that side of the response?
I'm not surprised at all. I'd like to know where David gets his Jesus underoos, because I haven't seen those. So, yeah. Uh, I think that's probably not hyperbolic, though. That I think that's probably accurate. And the thing that's concerning about this is that the church has been dismissive without thinking faithfully about it, without thinking, submitting all of our thinking to the lordship of Jesus. We're told in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, right, to take everything captive in obedience to Christ. And so what has happened is that the church has just basically given over all thinking on this issue to the state and said, well, it's against the law, therefore it's wrong and taboo and evil. And then so there's no research, no discussion, no anything which means that when people get their information, they're getting it from other sources as well. And some of those sources are not very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of misinformation out there about marijuana. There's a lot of misinformation that comes, frankly, from the marijuana lobby. And when it comes to medical marijuana, there's, I mean, the amount of, or the number of claims made by people about just the cure-all effects of marijuana are stunning. um, but then it's kind of pushed off to the corner, and then a person perhaps in need, a Christian in need, knows they really can't go talk to the church about it, but they're hearing all these wonderful things, which then probably, worst case scenario, causes them to violate their conscience and to sneak off and do something that maybe in their heart they wonder whether they should be doing. Bible's very clear that whatever is not done in faith is sin. And far better for the church to be proactive in this and talk about it and walk with people what they are going through that would maybe motivate them to turn to something like marijuana for bad. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too that on the other side of the spectrum, you find a similar attitude. My friend Zandra told us that she's Episcopalian and that her denomination is good with it. She says it just isn't a big deal. Like, we don't talk about it in the ministry, but a ton of our parishioners do it. We don't go around talking about how high we got or anything. It's just part of life for a lot of us. It isn't a roadblock to ministry at all. I'm not sure how it could be. So in her denomination, or at least in her church, I don't want to say that represents everybody, they're still not talking about it. They're doing it. It's not a big deal, but they're not talking about it, which means that they're still not bringing it into the light and, like you're saying, purposefully looking at how to handle this issue.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to know exactly why. I'm hoping that if they had people who were just getting plastered by alcohol multiple times per week, that would be an issue in the church, that they would go, Bible's actually pretty clear on drunkenness, and so but maybe because marijuana is not in the Bible, that you don't really have to think about it.
So I want to ask you if you personally believe there's any time where marijuana use could be a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, aside from the obvious non-controversial use of hemp and stuff, for materials, yes, I think so. I do believe that the cannabis plant is the good creation of God. That it wasn't something that came up demonically after the fall or anything like that. But like all of God's good gifts, it can be misused. There's a proper use for it. So I think it would be short-sighted just to immediately dismiss any possibility of good use. And that's a totally different discussion. But so it seems to me that the people use marijuana for multiple reasons. But one would be just to get high. I would have concerns about that, given the Bible's prohibitions on intoxication. I don't think we can just immediately substitute marijuana every time we see the word wine, for example. Alcohol and THC operate differently, but because the scriptures explain why God prohibits drunkenness, we can then begin to tie into intoxication through THC, and I think there's some commonality there. And so I do think that the biblical prohibition on drunkenness applies to intoxication through marijuana. Other people use it medicinally. Some, I think, very legitimately, others not legitimately. The two broad areas that I see people turning to marijuana, other than just to get high, would be just trying to cope with life, and maybe cope with life through checking out for a while. They find some relief through getting high. Um, that would be concerning to me as well, right? That far better to deal with the root issue uh,
Mhm.
than just to anesthetize the symptoms, right?
Mhm.
Um, and and then there are other medical benefits where people are suffering. Now, uh, even in breaking down those two, I think there's a lot of crossover between them because of anxiety and frustrations and such. And marijuana in many cases can have that kind of calming or soothing effect. It doesn't always work that way with everybody because it's such a highly complex uh,
Mhm.
drug that affects people differently. It's really I feel sorry for researchers and for like law enforcement as they're trying to wrap their arms because people don't respond the same
Mhm.
to marijuana, um, like maybe they do most of the time with alcohol. Um, Nevertheless, I do think that um, THC has some medicinal value, um, and the cannabis plant with CBD would be another component of it. And there's probably many more that do have proven demonstrable medical benefit, and we should thank God for that.
I want to break in here. We're about at the halfway mark of this interview, and welcome those of you who have joined in the last few minutes. Hey, just to do a summary, I like Todd's approach. He really cares for the whole person. So just to summarize, he absolutely believes that there's a place for marijuana, that it's God's gift. You've heard him say a couple times, and that it can be used to helpfully get people through acute pain. And he says the reason why we are concerned for like long term chronic use is not because we think it's a moral issue or sin, which he's going to go on to say, but because we actually need to be caring for people who are medicating themselves. And especially if they're doing it alone, how does someone who's doing any medication, especially one that affects your mind, how does anyone know when they, just just by way of how it works on your brain, how does anyone know when you could or should be tapering it off? So being in relationship with people, having them in your community, not making them feel guilty or weird because they've started using this is of the utmost importance to him and to me and to Christians everywhere. And so as we get into the second half of this interview, I do want to stop and promote his book, which is Cannabis and the Christian, and let you know that today's the last day you can get it half off at Lifeway. It's a Lifeway Christian stores online. I can't remember their address. I'll pop it here in the comments. But if you pre-order, you get 50% off. And then starting tomorrow morning or tonight at midnight, it'll be available on Amazon. So you can get it a couple ways. It's full of all of this kind of discussion that we're having. And I found it really helpful, especially in the last couple of chapters. It takes you through a guide, a discussion about how you can tell if marijuana would be helpful for you or someone you know, or if it's something you should steer clear from. He will talk about that more in depth in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to break in here at the halfway point and encourage your discussion and your questions. If you've got anything for me, it's not like I'm the expert, but I did spend, an hour or so with this man asking him some stuff that didn't make it into this interview. So, all right, back to Todd. I think, we were emailing before all this, but that's my main concern is if the church comes out as overly judgmental and we can't talk about this in the open, then when somebody realizes this is not working for me anymore, or we'd like to try other things, we're just tuned out. We don't know how to help.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Um, I'm encouraged that there's like a Facebook group where there's a little bit of accountability in that.
Mhm. Oh, I forgot to mention, there's a reason why I scheduled a break there. I was telling him before the show about a group that I joined um, that supports Christians who use cannabis, particularly for medicinal uses, but sometimes for uh, part recreational. They would consider it recreational, although for the most part, it sounds like they're using it to take the edge off their personality or some mild PTSD. So that's what I was telling him about. And if you're interested in that Facebook group, joining it or getting more information about it, you can hit me up. But you can also just look up, let's see, what is it? It's the Cannabis Christian Discussion Group. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. I'll look up the exact link for you. But he's saying that things like that give him hope, because even if people aren't in a church or don't feel good talking to their pastor about it, they can at least talk to someone online if they're concerned about their use or have questions about, just be accountable to somebody, basically.
Some community there. I would be concerned as an elder in the church, pastor in the church. I would be concerned by a person who said, I need a glass of wine every night so I can sleep. Because I think that self-medication is fraught with danger.
But not because you are morally concerned about them, because you're actually concerned about them as a human.
Yeah. Not that they're sinning through the use of alcohol, but there's something else going on that the church needs to be able to wrap their arms around them and help through this. And it could be that with accountability, and community, and that doesn't mean everybody in church has to know what everybody does.
I hope not.
But some people who care about you, who care about your soul, are walking with you in that. So let's say that there were people in my church, so that there are or there aren't, but who said I need a glass of wine in order to sleep, or I deal with PTSD and anxiety, and I found the only thing that helps is if I smoke a little bit of weed before I go to sleep. It helps me sleep. Otherwise, I'm just well, in the same way that I would be concerned with someone who needed any kind of sleep aid because of anxiety, I would want there to be some communication. Let's bring this into the light of some sort of accountable relationship with people who care about you. And so I would not be judgmental against an individual who did that. I would be more concerned if they were doing it secretly. But if you're doing that with the knowledge of some leadership in your church, I would say that's fine. I don't need to pastor everybody, but if it was somebody in my church, I would say, hey, we'll walk through you with this, and if this is working for you right now, let's begin to talk about this and see if there are other ways that we can, what's actually causing the stress in your life, and if it's something that we deal with through a non-psychoactive intervention, then that seems to be a healthier place to be. But until you get to that point,
that's the conversation. What you just expressed is true care for the individual, and that's where I'm hoping that our conversation on this goes. What do you think Christianity should actually be concerned about? What are the real dangers of marijuana? And I know your book covers all this, but just in your mind.
Certainly I would be concerned about teen use because it's demonstrable that THC interferes with brain development. And so it's just a really bad idea for minors to smoke pot. The unfortunate thing is that the male brain in particular develops for a long time. uh,
Mm-hmm.
25 to 27 years old before the male brain is fully developed. Women earlier, and of course, like every woman knows that, right? But uh, so you just don't get it back. If
Mm-hmm.
it's not the kind of thing where you can stop smoking and then your brain catches up. And I mean, this is just it's been clinically demonstrated over and over and over again. Another concern is for people, especially people who have a genetic predisposition towards mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
Marijuana is just a really, really bad idea. It is a horrible idea. The mental health community knows this. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are questions as to whether those who were not genetically predisposed to mental illness, if by regular pot use, that can catalyze
Mm-hmm.
mental illness to where you would not have otherwise um, become mentally ill. But certainly those who have a genetic predisposition towards mental illness, regular marijuana use demonstrably speeds up the onset of it, and it just makes a mess. Um, so those would be two deep concerns to where I would say, um, don't, if you're a minor, don't smoke pot. If you are, if there's mental illness of any kind that runs in your family, don't use cannabis. It's terrifying. Um, and then there are the other problems that smoking anything, it damages
Mm-hmm.
and heart. It's just not good. Pregnant women, I would say that's just a bad idea. American Pediatric Society is very clear on this. And but there's so much misinformation out there to where I've read, oh yeah, it's great for pregnant women to smoke pot, because it helps them with their
Mm-hmm.
morning sickness. And it's like no, there's better ways. There's better ways to deal with morning sickness um, than that. It's not good for the baby. Um, there are addiction issues. I think again, there's misinformation out there about addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's very clear that THC is not as addictive as some things like opioids certainly, or even caffeine for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
alcohol. Um, but not as addictive doesn't mean not addictive. Um,
Right.
and by addiction, I'm talking about a clinical definition of addiction, where you are so bent on feeding this desire that you risk harm to self and to others. You
Mm-hmm.
compromise yourself. You're willing to risk harm to others in order to feed this addiction. And for adults, about 1 in 10 regular users will develop a clinical addiction to marijuana. About 1 in 6 minors will. If they're regular users. A regular user is someone who uses 3 times a week or so.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think one of the things that stood out for me that I learned from your book was a little bit about amotivational syndrome. Because all of the rest of these things that you mentioned are playing with percentages. It's a little bit of a roulette, and that doesn't seem to be as terrifying. But what I got from your book is kind of amotivational syndrome and coping with life and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't. Like that seems across the board. That's gonna happen at some level.
yeah, and the funny thing about that is that like anecdote or not anecdotally, but stereotypically, right? That's the criticism of marijuana, or the running joke, right? You like
Mm-hmm.
live in your parents' basement for the rest of your life, and just
Mm-hmm.
play video games and eat Hostess products or Doritos or whatever. But the funny thing is that there have actually been studies on this through like Stanford and MIT, or I can't remember it's them specifically, but like highly prestigious universities who are saying yes, uh, regular marijuana use will interfere with ambition, and they give it this name, amotivational syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And then physiologically, we actually know why that happens too, which is interesting because THC it does interfere with your memory making ability. Um, And also mentally, what goes on in our minds is it interferes with our ability to like evaluate where I'm at right now and where I was to get to here, and then also where I am right now and what I need to do in order to get where I want to be. You just kind of lose the ability or care about doing that if you're regularly using THC. And if you don't know what like, if you can't connect the dots to how you got to where you are right now, and you can't connect the dots to where you are right now and how or where you want to be, then it makes goal setting and ambition, it makes it really, really difficult. And so physiologically, we actually know why that kind of stereotypical joke is a real thing. Yeah, and so you even think of someone like Jordan Peterson, who's saying, like, if you want to make a difference in your life, make your bed. Just because, but even doing that becomes difficult if you can't connect the dots to, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do this because this is going to have this payoff in the future. So that's good.
All right, as we kind of wrap up this interview, I want to look forward at what Christianity can do better. For us to gain a second look from people, maybe we've burned them before with our judgmental talk about cannabis. What do we need to do and say differently to make sure that whatever's going on in this person's life, that cannabis doesn't become an obstacle to us presenting the story and love of Jesus?
Yeah. Well, so from a Christian perspective, the book is called Cannabis and the Christian because the book is really written for Christians. So now much of what I wrote applies to non-Christians, but it's primarily aimed at Christians because I would like for the church to treat cannabis use as a discipleship issue.
Yes.
Rather than just being dismissive. Let's
Yes.
think like disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ, and see if we can help people. And then also, if we're going to treat it as a discipleship issue, then we need to know something about cannabis. We need to know something about how it works, what the rewards of it are, and what the risks of it are, and help people make God-honoring choices. Rather than just stereotype it as, like I said before, well, that's just what the stoners do, and it's like the devil's lettuce or whatever, and castigate people for vile behavior. Maybe the church can have open discussions about this and help people make decisions where we help people sort out all of the information that we're bombarded with. We're in an information trust crisis right now.
Yes, well said.
Where, so like we're in the middle of this like global pandemic. I guess we are, right? It seems that we are, but there's so much misinformation out there, and the people that we're supposed to be able to trust, like CDC and FDA in particular in America, it feels like they've compromised, and we've caught them double speaking at times, and it's really bad when we can't trust the experts at all, because I have an engineering background. I know my way around science a bit, but all that saying, I'm not intimidated by people who wear white lab coats, but I know enough to know that I don't know anything, right? And I read a medical journal, and I do the best I can with it, but I can't read these medical studies and try to figure out what's right and what's wrong, especially when it comes to the coronavirus. I'm not a virologist, or however you pronounce. I don't even know how to pronounce the names of the experts. And so we're kind of at the mercy of people who are experts, but if we can't trust them, then that's a hard place to be.
Yes.
There's so much information out there about marijuana, both good information and bad information, pro marijuana, against marijuana,
Mhm.
both sides, the church needs to help vet as much as we're able to. We need to help people vet the information. I tried to do that in the book, but it's just a starting point because we're
Yeah.
getting more and more information all the time. I suspect that marijuana is going to be made legal at the federal level at some point. It's going to lose its Schedule 1 status, right?
Mhm.
And that's going to open up more opportunities for research, and we're going to find
Yes.
out that there are more medical benefits. There are going to be more drugs that are approved, not just emergency authorized, but approved
Mhm.
for, that come from the cannabis plant. Um, and now also, like I mentioned before, I think the church should be in a position where we help people think like disciples of Jesus when it comes to their health care. Um, and maybe if the church would have been doing what they were supposed to do, we could have helped people avoid like opioid addiction. Um,
Mhm.
if there was some more
Wow.
accountability, and if we didn't just um, say, well, my doctor prescribed it, so it must be good, right?
Mhm.
I'm not saying that doctors were evil for prescribing opioids. They work,
Right.
right?
Right.
And for acute pain and acute illness, I have no issue with mind-altering drugs at
Mhm.
all, right?
Mhm.
At all. Um, Now, but for chronic conditions, mind-altering drugs, is there a better way? Is there a better way? Especially if those mind-altering drugs are addictive. Um,
Mhm.
it would be helpful if the church walked with people through this and helped, um, and there was some accountability and where people didn't feel like they had to hide their
Mhm.
condition or hide the things that they were trying because they're just seeking relief. Um, I think the church needs to think about what it is to suffer more. We need a really good biblical theology of suffering that is preached from pulpits and taught in classes and discussed in Bible studies. Um, that that I mean, because the Bible has a lot to say about suffering, a lot,
Mhm.
and it's not a one size fits all. Shoehorn your way into this is what the Bible says about suffering, so deal with it, right?
Mhm.
The Bible has a lot to say, and it's varied, and wisdom is needed to help people walk through suffering, because a lot of things are going on, both good and bad, in suffering. So anyway, those are a few ideas that come to mind. And then I think in terms of evangelism, I mean, if people feel judged the moment they walk into a church, be it over cannabis use or whatever else, then that's just not a place. That's not a good place to be, because I think the church needs to think seriously. Why is it that the worst cultural sinners of the day were so attracted to Jesus?
Mhm.
They they knew he was holy and righteous, but they also knew that he was kind and merciful and good. And they were attracted to him because he's like the Lord of life, right? But
Mhm.
not just because he was awesome, because I think they found in him someone, ironically, that they could relate to, and that they could be their worst around him. Like they knew that he knew the worst about them, but they didn't feel rejected. They felt accepted. Um, and somehow the church blows that. We
Yeah.
don't do a good job with that. And I think we need to do some soul searching. Why is it that we're so unlike Jesus in this regard? Because
Mm.
I don't think most sinners, and that would be.
Oh, Todd, it has been a pleasure to have you. As we mentioned, your book, Cannabis and the Christian, What the Bible Says About Marijuana, comes out really soon, the 17th on Amazon. And that's a great way for people who are watching, who've enjoyed this, to connect with you and your ideas. But is there any other way our listeners can follow your work or get a hold of you?
Well, certainly my Western Seminary has a website, and there's contact information there. I do have a podcast called Food Trucks in Babylon, which is all
Ooh.
about hopefully living faithfully in a post-Christian context. That's what we aim to talk about, and I think it's a lot of fun. So that would be one more way to follow me.
Okay. Hey, everybody, there's a little bit more details to follow, and I'll put up a link again to get the book. It's 50% off until midnight tonight when it's released on Amazon. But you can also scroll up. I want to thank AJ and Madai and Blackjack Stocks and Maria and Furman and everybody else who said hi and let me know they were listening. Really appreciate you guys. This is an ongoing discussion, as Dr. Miles said, and he has done a lot of research. So there's no way we could cover it all in this interview, but he said if I had any questions to pass it on. I want to let you guys know that he does cover those verses in the Bible. He does a whole Bible study on comparing it to alcohol and how we can treat it. He talks very favorably about, as you heard, using THC for acute problems. And we talked a little bit here, but want to talk more about that fine line between what is medical use and what isn't. Because for a lot of people, they struggle with day-to-day life stuff, and they might not even consider it medical themselves, but it's actually playing a role of helping them be sedated, helping them sleep. And of course, there's still plenty of states where marijuana is not legalized yet. And so there's no way they could be under a doctor's watchful eye. And so that's kind of why I wanted to bring it today, is because whether you are, have never smoked in your life, or you've experimented, you use it for medical, or you're high right now, we don't care. I'm hoping that churches, that pastors, that leaders, people who care will watch this and say, we don't care. This should not be a barrier to being in community with the church. It shouldn't be a barrier to coming into a church. And what we want to do is, if you're using, and especially if you don't have a doctor helping you, be accountable, and don't make your significant other do it, because it's hard to self-monitor with any kind of mind-altering substance. So be responsible, seek God in it. If you're a Christian. If you're not a Christian, you're probably not super into this discussion anyway, but that's kind of what I was trying to bring forward today. And if you use cannabis in any way, I'm probably not interested in your CBD oil, but if you use cannabis in any way, I would love for you to contact me, tell me your experience. Hopefully I can share some resources. So that's pretty much it for me. Thank you for being live with me, guys. And I'm just going to roll the last few seconds of this to make sure you know where to get the book and what the book cover looks like, just in case you want to go through that. Oh, and I did mention earlier, I want to say one more time, the most helpful part of this book for me was the Q&A kind of towards the end that says, how would you go about deciding if you were using this in a way that was God honoring? So I thought that was really cool, because there's obviously room for that. Anyway, he does a good job, and here we go. And you told me as we got started that you occasionally speak or lecture on this subject. You're probably going to be booking up quickly, but is that something people could bribe you?
Oh,
Shake some money in front of your face, and you might say,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
My contact information is there, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter and such, on the various social media things as well. So.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Todd, for being here. And again, the book Cannabis and the Christian comes out on Amazon the 17th. And I am going to give away 2 copies. If you email me, askachristianfriend@gmail.com, and let me know that you listened to this whole thing. I want to reward the first 3 people who do that with your own copy of the book. So thanks again
Oh,
to
and
Todd.
I'd also say that if you pre-order, it's 50% off on lifeway.com. Also,
Ooh,
yeah, so
that's a great tip.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week with another Conversations Christians Suck At. Thanks for watching and see you later. All right. That's it for me. Bye, everybody. So thankful that you were able to join us. Bye.